Don't you just love walking out to your garden to see your beautiful young tomato plants and you take a look at these nice fruit that are starting to grow and, oh, ugh, what's that? That's blossom end rot. And that is not what you want to see. That is the bane of so many tomato growers every year. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you about what exactly is blossom end rot, what causes it, what can you do to prevent it, what should you do if you already have it. And at the end, I'm going to share a little tip that most people don't talk about, but is actually probably the single best thing you can do to avoid getting blossom end rot ever again. Stay tuned for that. Hit like and subscribe. I am about to dive right into it. So blossom end rot, it ruins your tomatoes, it ruins your peppers, it ruins your eggplants, even sometimes cucumbers. A lot of fruiting plants really can get blossom end rot. Why do plants get blossom end rot? And we're going to talk mostly about tomatoes in this video because that is by far the most common thing that people fight blossom end rot on every year in their garden. Blossom end rot is quite simply, it's a lack of calcium. That's what causes it. And you might hear that and go, cool, I'll throw some calcium at my plant, it will be fine, and blossom end rot cured. That's usually not the case. So why is blossom end rot a calcium problem? Well, calcium is really vital to forming a fruit on a plant. So if you don't have enough calcium, the cell walls really just can't close up and form a proper, encasement around the fruit. The skin doesn't fully build, essentially. So you end up with the soft spot or a lesion on the blossom end of the fruit, and that turns into rot. The fruit is ruined. It's not going to be okay. It's not going to recover. Okay, so blossom end rot is a bad thing. You don't want to see that on your tomatoes, right? You go out and it's heartbreaking. But if it's a calcium problem, why can't you just give it calcium? That's a little bit more nuanced. So what's actually happening here is almost always a problem with watering. Blossom end rot is, I'll say like 90+% of the time, truly just a problem in your garden because you have had inconsistent watering. Whether that's you got a big rainstorm and the plant was flooded with water, or you maybe missed a couple of waterings and it got a little bit drier than you'd like, that can lead to blossom end rot. Because those kinds of conditions make it difficult for your plant to uptake calcium. It's important to remember that plants really only get their calcium from the soil. So they take it up through their roots, it moves vertically up through the plant, and it moves slow, right? So when you don't have proper watering conditions, that plant is really going to struggle to transport that calcium. And even when it's transporting calcium correctly, it's kind of slow. So what do? Best thing you can do to prevent blossom end rot in these kinds of situations is make sure you have a really good watering and irrigation plan. I use drip irrigation because it helps me to make sure I'm getting a good even flow of water. I'm not just going to wash out the soil, and water too fast. It helps keep things really moist, and I can just run it on a timer so that I don't have to think too hard about it. And I should say I don't run it on a timer like schedule. Every time I run it, I know it needs to run for about 30 minutes to hydrate my garden. So when I start it, there's a 30-minute timer that automatically stops it. Don't water based on a schedule. Water when your plants need it. All that said, improper watering is the biggest reason that you'll see blossom end rot in a garden. But I still have blossom end rot. So what did I do wrong? So look, there's something else that can lead to blossom end rot in your tomatoes, especially your early fruits. And that is, like I mentioned before, calcium is just slow. It doesn't move through the plant very quickly. However, other nutrients, especially in a young plant like these, they're moving fast, like nitrogen. It's growing quickly. The plant is shooting upward faster than the calcium is really collecting in meaningful quantities at the top parts of the plant. Well, what happens when these first fruit set is that sometimes there's just not enough calcium that has made its way up the plant in sufficient quantities to build good fruit. If that happens, you just need to wait, right? Those first fruit, they might have blossom end rot. As a matter of fact, the most common place you'll see blossom end rot is in the first flush of tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, whatever. After that, later in the season, the second flush, usually you will see less or no blossom end rot. Again, just a calcium transport thing. It moves slow. Your plant needs a lot of it to build tomatoes. Once it's a healthy, mature plant, it has a lot of it available and you can put on these big, beautiful fruits. But before that, it might struggle a little bit. So it could be watering. It could be just that, you're really your plant is growing faster than it's been able to supply calcium to its fruit. But what do you do if you have it, right? So like in this case, I have these plants that have blossom end rot on the end of these Martino's Roma tomatoes. Look, you don't do anything. You pick the fruit off and you throw them in your compost pile. That's what you do. You can't save these fruit. Once they have blossom end rot, they are not going to heal. It's not going to ripen into a delicious tomato or pepper. It's going to be rotten and gross, and you shouldn't really save that fruit. So take it off the plant, throw it in your compost pile, and wait for the next fruits to set. They'll probably be in a better shape. If you happen to do a soil test and find out, whoa, you actually do have a calcium deficiency, then add it using something like CalMag. The balance of calcium and magnesium helps to ensure that the plant does not get a deficiency on one nutrient or the other from lockout. So be careful. If you really need to add calcium, you only know that if you do a soil test. So keep that in mind. If you use potting mix like I do and you reuse it year after year after year, it can deplete the calcium that's there. I happen to use fertilizers that have calcium. That's a really simple thing to do. Even inexpensive fertilizers like Miracle-Gro, they have calcium in them. So look at the back of your fertilizer box or bottle. Make sure it has calcium, and you're going to give your plants more than they need. So we've talked about how to prevent blossom end rot. We've talked about what causes it. We've also talked about what to do if you have it. And there's one other thing that I think a lot of people overlook that can pretty much guarantee you'll never have blossom end rot again. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about a couple of myths. The first myth I want to talk about, because it comes up every time people talk about blossom end rot on the internet, like anywhere. Oh, just crush up some eggshells, put them in your soil, and your plants will be fine. No, they won't. If you truly have a calcium deficiency, putting eggshells in your soil is not going to feed your plants. The calcium in eggshells needs to be completely broken down, usually through more of a chemical process even than typical composting. They can stay in soil for centuries. Seriously. Eggshells are not going to provide usable calcium. They're not going to provide rapid calcium, and calcium moves slow anyhow. So maybe don't put your eggshells in the soil. That's not going to do anything to help with your blossom end rot. The other one that comes up a lot is to use Epsom salts to fix blossom end rot, and that's a terrible idea. Epsom salts are magnesium. They're not calcium, right? And magnesium can actually work to block your plant's uptake of calcium if you get an imbalance. And unless you tested your soil and it says, hey, you have a magnesium deficiency, don't add magnesium to your soil, right? Unless you have a very specific reason to do so, because you've done a soil test, you know you need magnesium, and you've measured out exactly how much magnesium is going to come from these Epsom salts, and use CalMag if you really need it. I said that earlier, I'll say it again. CalMag is a much better solution than Epsom salt. And then one last myth, don't waste your money. There is sprays. If you go to your garden center, if you go online, you'll see like, spray this on your plant to stop blossom end rot. They don't work. It's not real. They operate again on that premise that, oh, we're going to deliver calcium directly to the plant through a foliar spray. Plants take up calcium through their roots. It goes up into the plant and transports very slowly. Putting calcium on the leaves of your plant has very, very little to no effect, depending on the specific plant, on actually intaking calcium. And once it does, it won't move down the plant into the fruit. So really kind of a waste of time, definitely a waste of money. They will not fix blossom end rot. They will not prevent blossom end rot. You can't spray your way out of this one. Okay, so those are some myths to avoid. Don't spread those. Don't repeat them. Don't believe them. You can save yourself time and money, right? But I promised you there's actually one other thing you can do to basically guarantee you won't have blossom end rot in the future. And that's select a variety that's not susceptible to blossom end rot. Now, there is no fruit that is completely blossom end rot proof. However, very specific tomato varieties like Roma tomato varieties and other paste tomato varieties, they tend to be much more susceptible to blossom end rot, especially on those early fruits. So I happen to plant like 5 Martino's Roma tomatoes because I was like, hey, these are great. They're going to be perfect for sauce. I wish I had taken a few minutes to go look, are Martino's Roma susceptible to blossom end rot? Turns out it's very common. I grow a lot of different varieties of cherry-sized tomatoes, especially because I love the micro-dwarfs. I gotta say, I have never, not once, ever, in about 5 years of growing micro-dwarf tomatoes, encountered blossom end rot on a micro-dwarf. Cherry tomatoes in general very rare to get blossom end rot. More common on bigger fruits, very common on paste type tomatoes. So seed selection and variety selection can go a long way. If you buy seeds from a very focused, dedicated tomato seed seller, oftentimes they have information on if they're disease resistant, if they're blossom end rot resistant, or if they're honest, they might even put on there like, yes, blossom end rot can be a problem on that first set of fruit. Don't panic. Make sure you're taking good care of your plant, giving it even watering, and your next flush will look great. Blossom end rot, it is a problem that most gardeners will run into at least once. The biggest thing to remember is that proper watering, proper moisture retention is important. That first flush of tomatoes or peppers is more likely to have blossom end rot than the second or third flush, so don't panic. Just wait, be patient, take good care of your plants. They'll take good care of you. And remember, plants help us grow.